All right, great. Welcome everybody to our first community sync and demo of 2020. Big time. Thanks, Andy.
I'm just fighting a laptop problem right now.
I'm doing the same thing. We have a pretty busy slate today, I think, on demos. So we'll do a few demos from the team. Mr. Zetlin on the line will jump in here at the end to preview some of the extensibility concept work that he's been doing, and then we'll open up for questions or topics from the community, anybody that's on the line, and then we'll kind of wrap up from there. So I think getting us started today, we have Andy, who's going to demo some category cart experience work.
Oh yeah.
Category.
So am I sharing? So this first part, the reason I was singing Thunderstruck when I came in is I feel like I'm stealing.
I think it's sharing still.
Good heavens.
What is?
Sure.
I plugged it in.
Can anyone else on the call see?
Is anyone?
No, can't see anything.
No.
Are you? It's showing up on our screen.
Are you in
It might be local though, it may not be shared.
Did you click the share?
Oh, yeah. We
Are
clicked
you
the
in
share.
the meeting?
You sure you clicked the share?
I clicked the share.
Oh.
Nope. It's shared on that screen, but it's not shared on here.
Huzzah.
Technical difficulties.
It's on. Recording is on.
You have to leave audio.
Audio off.
Yeah.
You called it? Yeah, to share. The wireless tool.
I don't think you're in the Blue Jeans meeting.
This is.
I'm sharing.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
Welcome
I
back.
can't believe we've had
Huzzah.
this system for like a year and a half, and still every meeting it has a different problem. This is
NVS.
awesome.
And
There's no such thing as a
there,
functioning
Yeah, maybe just join the
video conferencing stuff.
dial into the meeting.
okay.
So many meetings today, Andy.
Dude. Let's see.
Blue
It's my time
Jeans.
to code.
Great piece of software.
It gets better the more you use it.
You already. If you just mute yourself.
Woo. That was close.
We're at the point where we're like holes in our Blue Jeans.
Alright, sure.
There we go.
Hey.
Faded.
Yeah. Sometimes you buy them like that. Nope. Okay.
Nobody.
You can see my screen now?
Here.
Yes.
Yeah, alright. I'll just do it off mode. So yeah, I feel like I'm stealing a little UX thunder here. You guys feel free to jump in if you'd like. But we have a new cart page. So Benny is getting, calling it V2, a little rework, a little love, a little refreshment. And so with that comes a dedicated page for the cart. So we'll still have the sidebar, I think, as an option, but Benny itself will have a cart page, like a full page. So this is the mock-up on mobile. I won't go too in-depth into the mock-ups, but yeah, it's not up there.
Okay. I'm just gonna look on somebody's screen.
But you can see all the things that are in the cart little sidebar pull-out thing right now. And some extras, I guess, some gift cards, coupon codes, things like that we're planning on. So here's mobile, here's desktop. Really the big difference there is that the order summary, cart summary floats over here to the right instead of being in just that single column display here on the mobile view. So the first thing I did this week was kind of lay out this cart page. So there's a lot of placeholder content right now, but here's the items list would be here. Here's your, we're calling these like price adjustments, like shipping method, coupon codes and such. And then order summary there on the bottom. This is the mobile view. If I switch to the desktop view, you can see order summary kind of pops out to another column there on the right and floats.
Would you mind closing the inspect so we can
Yeah.
see the desktop and what it is?
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, so it kind of floats over there and stays in view, which I think was the primary goal of that, to get people to pay money. So that's kind of the layout of the page. That was the first one. And then you can see here I picked up price adjustments after that. So a lot of these things are just like, oh, hey, this items list is going to show up once this other ticket is complete. But I picked up one for price adjustments, which has this kind of cool accordion looking thing. So I thought that was useful, could be useful on pages other than this. So we already have like an accordion section for filters. So I made this kind of a part of the public API as a new accordion component that you can use wherever you want. So to show off some of that, I have Storybook open here. So this is kind of your, if you just have, I'm not sharing my code, but there's an accordion component, and within it is like accordion sections. And then you give each one a title and some contents. And so here's kind of the default. If you don't add anything else, all the sections open, they can all be open at the same time. The other kind of major prop or property you can send into accordion is, hey, I want to restrict this thing to only have one of these open at a time. And so here's a story for that, where if you open another one, the previous one closes. I didn't try to do an exhaustive list of use cases with this. I kind of figured we'd add them as we go, as people need them. But those are two pretty common ones. You can also say, hey, I want this section open initially.
Yeah.
The mockups had the shipping methods open initially. So that was an easy one. Here's just showing that it works when you're only allowed one section. And then you can also have multiple sections open initially. So if you wanted like every single section or something like that, you could do that pretty easily. So this is just kind of showing off some of that stuff.
Cool.
Yeah, that's pretty much it for the cart. And
I can jump in and show the order summary since it sort of plays.
Sure.
Real quick. I don't know if that's
Nice.
your order stuff.
Hey,
Oh, the order summary.
seems relevant.
Were you sharing on
You
your
have to
screen?
share, you have
I
to join
will.
the call on your computer and then share
Oh,
on
no.
your
Because this
computer.
wasn't working.
This plug is not.
All right. Loading Outlook.
Stop sharing.
Fill the time with jokes or something.
Oh. So, I don't have any jokes. Were there any questions about new cart page or anything that you saw there? Price adjustments, accordion.
I like the fact that now we have a sentence there that says this will be completed by this issue, and so marking out the parts of it. I think that's really helpful
Okay, cool.
to know status. So I don't remember seeing that before in previous implementations. So I think that's a good
Nice.
addition.
Thanks for reminding me also. So this cart page I didn't show off. You can get there by just going to /cart at the end of your URL. So, and we're lazy loading it, so it's not fully ready yet. Obviously, there's a lot of placeholder content there. So it shouldn't be shipped with your bundles unless you actually go there and pull it in. So.
Am I sharing the screen?
Yes.
You are sharing.
Okay, cool. To tack on to what Andy has been saying, so he broke out we broke out a bunch of the stories for the cart page, and I picked up the order summary view, which is this thing on the right. Really simple component that, like Andy said, floats along on the right. It's got a nice sticky top to sort of slide along with the content. I artificially expanded the item list just so that it would, for example purposes. But this was a pretty simple looking component at first, and then I realized that certain line items and certain things that we need to get from GraphQL are accessible in certain versions of Magento. So 2.3.3 has cart discount, and 2.3.4 has cart discounts, and then Enterprise Edition has gift cards, and Community Edition has no gift cards. So that was interesting. So I can just dive into this a little bit and kind of show what I'm working on right now, which is sort of like customized components for each line item. So we have a discount summary and a gift card summary for now, just because those are the ones that are the more difficult ones. If you look inside gift card summary, we're exposing these fragments that we have access to, I think, actually in both 233 and 234. I just tried this. And so what'll happen is in Enterprise Edition, and this will maybe like some build plugin will actually run some schema validator and then sort of swap out this GraphQL string at build time instead of doing this feature flag toggle. But it'll basically just replace the contents of this fragment so that when the query at runtime is made here, you can see the fragment is passed in, interpolated into the get price summary query string. But when we build this, the build plugin could say, oh, this client doesn't have is community edition. They don't have gift cards. So this will just be basically a no-op. It's just requesting the type name as you saw. And then the gift card summary component itself would probably just be a no-op. So all this would just be excluded from the bundle, just trying to save some bytes here and there. And then I had to do something similar with discount because of the difference in name. So I'm still working on this code, and I still have a ways to go. I don't have a storybook or anything implemented yet, but this is functioning off of the actual cart, and with coupons and taxes, it does represent things properly, but it's deceivingly simple looking. Not as simple. I found out yesterday. That's it. I can go into the other thing.
Sure. Pause for questions on your order summary work. Any questions for Stephen on that? And then just jump into your.
All right, cool. Let's see how fast Yarn installs. The other thing I wanted to talk about was this spike that I did before the break, and purpose of this was to kind of figure out how. So right now, if you guys have been following along with the work we've been doing in the latest release, we've moved a lot of stuff to Redux, it's already in Redux. We've been moving things to GraphQL. One of the things that Apollo does is it caches data for you, and then you can sort of render based on that cache. But we are not really taking advantage of that. We've been sort of making queries just like we used to do in REST, and then we've been taking those the data back, and we've been propagating that to the Redux. And then, as you see, the Redux would the context would update with the Redux values, and your components would then update. So what I wanted to do was see if we could do that without Redux. And so in this spike, I've closed it since then. It was open for a while. But we have a cart trigger component. Not running. Cart trigger component used to make a query for data every time it would render, and other things would also make queries for data. And it was a little bit duplicative. So instead, if I can get this to work, the cart trigger now makes an initial query for data, and then other stuff like adding an item to the cart also makes queries for that same data, but instead of this being rendered off the cart value from context, it's now just updated from the Apollo cache. So you can see here. Let me go to cart trigger. I was going to show you, but. So I had to restart my computer, and it just like totally messed up this view because it was like. Okay. So as you can see here, we used to call an effect that every time this ran, we'd call get cart details. Now we only call it whenever the cart ID changes and we have one, and you can see here data is just constantly monitoring that value coming back from the query. So if you were just looking at this component, you might wonder how this query is refired, and that's because every time that you add an item, the cart, it updated to 2. This query isn't actually recalled, and so that's because inside the add inside like add or remove, we call this refetch query, which calls a get cart details query, which happens to update the data that cart trigger component cares about. This is all to say that, very long-winded, roundabout way, but basically you can have components that monitor data using Apollo queries, and then other things can form queries that update that data, and the Apollo cache will get updated accordingly, and your components will update to render. And you don't have to care about or wait for Redux to update store. Yeah. Okay. That's all I wanted to say. Very simple. No big deal.
Super
Yeah,
very
so all
cool.
of that.
Way to go. Nice work.
Yeah. Accessible demos.
Any questions for Steven on using Apollo Cache?
I threw the link to this in the public Slack, so it was a while ago. But if anybody wants to talk about this stuff, that was a spike. We don't actually have any of this in develop or anything. But I'm hoping that we can sort of modernize our use of data in our application.
Right on. All right. Unless there are any questions, I think Ravant, you are up next.
Can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Awesome. So this was a bug that was reported like a week ago. So what happened was once we started using the service worker, we were caching the HTML files. So whenever someone refreshes the page, it would return the cached HTML file, but in the back it used to fetch the new HTML file, and it compares both of them byte to byte. If there's a change, it throws a notification to the UI saying something has changed, please refresh the page. So that was working just fine in the local and also in AWS and everywhere else. But once we deployed it to the cloud server, I guess New Relic analytics was added to it. And one of the things that New Relic adds to the HTML is a timestamp. And the timestamp changes every time you refresh the page. And now the condition fails because byte to byte, the timestamp has changed. And every time you refresh the page, the service worker will throw a notification saying, please refresh. And that's bugging to the user because nothing actually has changed. Something that really matters hasn't changed. So if you look at this code, this is developed right now. And all we do is we look at the cached response and also the response from the service. And we get the text and we simply do a not equals to, and if it's true, it sends a message to the UI about a HTML update. The changes we made is, look at release pilot. Looks a huge changeover, but nothing really is. So we still have the same condition. Along with it, we have created a function called has HTML changed, which gets the new HTML and also the old HTML. The cached response is what we have in the browser from the previous refresh, and cloned response is actually what we got from the service. You look at has HTML changed, it just has these verification functions, and it runs the sum function of it. What it means is, even if one of the verification steps fails, the refresh has to be a refresh notification has to be sent to the UI. And since this is like an array of functions, you can add any number of them later. So right now we are looking for if resources have changed. When I say resources, it's JS files, CSS files, anything that changes because of a new build. This function is going to fail, and the UI is going to re-render. You can do this based on title. Every time title changes, you want to have a refresh. Every time the backend URL has changed, this is what we inject into HTML tag about the cloud server URL where they can fetch the images and stuff from. Even if that has changed, you would do it. And each of those functions, if you look at their signature, they get the new DOM and also the old DOM. And you can do anything, and all it has to do is return a Boolean value. If it's true, which means something has actually changed, so the UI has to refresh. If it's a false, it doesn't matter. It just continues to the next function. So this is it's made with a scalable view in the future, because if let's say someone wants to change like refresh based on meta tags as well, you can just add a new function called has meta tags changed, or like have a certain meta tag has changed, and write your own function. It gets the new DOM and also the old DOM, make your comparisons, and just return the value. And all the functions you see have the exact same signature. That's it. So that's how. So since we don't really care about New Relic timestamp right now, that's why the UI never says there's a refresh available. But if you change the build, like any code changes or anything like that, the UI does tell you something has changed.
So in the PR, I think Andy had commented about the fact that this is like a whitelist versus blacklist of the things we don't care about. Is there a reason why we did one, not the other? Was this sort of...
So instead of looking for what has not changed, it's easy to say what has changed, because we only care about certain things in the whole HTML5.
Really?
So it's easy to say only look for these things instead of saying don't look for these things.
You don't see that list of things changing
no,
much?
Not often. Because if you look at the HTML that we have, we are looking for style tags, we are looking for link tags, and we're looking for all the, if you look at index, okay, it's not showing up. Yeah, if you look at this one, this is the final HTML that is served from the Webpack server to the UI. We are looking for all the, it's here, all the JS files. We are looking for, if you go to the top, we are looking for all the styles if something has changed. We're looking for data optimizing origin and also the backend URL. And these are things as of now that we really care about. But if something comes up in the future, we can just add a function. But if, let's say, we are looking only at the whitelist, the blacklist,
right?
It's like you have to go and change the whole functionality of also don't look for this thing, also don't look for this thing. It's just a trade-off of how many changes you want to make in the future, or how often do you make these changes.
And this is all happening in the service worker, so it's not like the bundle size is changing for the rest of the application.
No.
And it's just checking the...
because the service worker and the UI have different bundles.
Right.
Any changes is only going to affect that bundle. And this full test coverage for this. So even in the future, if someone by mistake removes a verification function or anything, tests are going to fail and will immediately. Cool, that's it.
Great. Any questions for Ravant? All right. So I think last on our list of demos is Mr. Zetlin. Talk about extensibility.
Well, now, to be fair, this isn't precisely a demo. I just kind of want to talk to folks about the progress of the concepts. So I'll try not to make this just me rambling, but I would definitely like to see some conversation happening. It's okay if it doesn't. I know that people weren't necessarily prepared for this stuff, but I have a couple of diagrams that I would like to sort of show. And I think what I'll do to introduce this is start with one that's a little bit scary looking because of my own unfortunate tendencies with diagrams, but nevertheless, we'll see. Can y'all see this?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a lot of stuff. And if you follow the numbered blue arrows, you'll see the intended workflow path. But the diagram will definitely be revised and be a little bit more sensible to folks who aren't the elite force brain trust that are on this current call. So that said, what this diagram is supposed to demonstrate, or at least what's supposed to illuminate, is how an extension process or an extension framework will work so that it provides granularity and flexibility of the sort that Magento, whoa,
Wasn't me.
that's okay, of the sort that Magento extension developers are accustomed to, but at the same time, it does so in a PWA friendly way. So it uses concepts that are already native to the front end frameworks and build processes that we've chosen. Stephen, do you just want to talk? Do you just want to say things?
No, my allergies
You got
want to
anything
say
else? You got
something.
like a whoopee cushion?
We'll mute ourselves over here.
Everyone's quitting.
No, seriously, I hope you feel better, man. It's all good.
Yeah.
So thanks, guys. So again, this is supposed to demonstrate how we would make an extension framework that supports the level of granularity that Magento extension developers and users are accustomed to, that would then lead to a rich ecosystem of extensions that could install into a PWA project and augment or change its functionality in all sorts of ways. But the way Magento does that is with a whole lot of at runtime evaluation of the configuration of the store. And that leads to some performance problems, which we then mitigate with cache. But that's Magento, which is as we've talked about at length on this team, is an application designed for a post-back based web, a web of full connectivity and high bandwidth. And for the progressive web app, we want to avoid doing things at runtime, that is, at the time that the user is looking at their phone, at the or inside their phone's little heating up CPU. We want to avoid doing extension type stuff at that time and instead do everything that we can ahead of time. So what we've done here is try to migrate some of the basic extension concepts from the Magento way of things into Webpack. So that we can do as many extension things at build time as possible. So you can see that in an extensible project, which has extensions you'll see here in the I don't know if you can see my mouse pointer. Somebody wave from Polaroid if you can see my mouse pointer. It's going like this.
Yes.
Okay. So here we have a set of dependencies. These would be in your node modules folder under direct dependencies that you specify in your package JSON. And some of those dependencies will have a special signal file. We're calling it plugin.js here just for example purposes, but it may not be that. The point is that each of these extensions will have a way of indicating that they are an extension. I won't relate this back to Magento concepts in every case going on, but in this case, for instance, it would be the equivalent of the composer JSON specifying that the type of the package is an M2 extension. So in these node modules, our PWA project has extensions for Page Builder and Upward SEO and Adobe Launch, and even Peregrine and Venia UI themselves are extensions. They're still first level dependencies, but they also have special behavior as indicated by the extensibility flags. So when a PWA project folder runs its build script, touches the build configuration, and begins to execute BuildPack, which is also an extension, it should create a kind of universal bus. You can think of this as an event bus, but in Magento terms, you can also think of it as a map of interceptable handles. In this sort of example, we have color-coded some of the ones that belong to the app natively. So your app would have extension points built into it from scaffolding that allow other things to touch these things. When the app mounts some special thing, when the upward file generates some special thing, when the application shell generates maybe stuff that modifies the HTML. And then the orange lists here are, for instance, extension points that are contributed by extensions themselves, which we'll get into later. And then the blue ones here are things that are actually built into Webpack and built into our BuildPack and build processes themselves. So once this build process is created, it goes through, gathers all of the direct dependencies in node modules that declare themselves as extensions, and then sorts them based on their dependencies, which is basically the same thing that Magento does today. It's important in our case because each of these things may have dependencies on other things. So Magento Peregrine, if Page Builder literally lists that it depends on Vinia UI, as it will, then we'll execute the Vinia UI plugin JS handler before Page Builder and so forth. So now that this is here, we get to this crazy mess of arrows. And this is actually just illustration. I'm sorry if it looks complicated. The point here is that there's a many-to-many relationship, and in a future version of this diagram, we'll make it look less busy. But the next step is for the registration process to occur, where BuildPack will take this hooks registry object and ship it to each of the extensions. Okay, Magento Peregrine, register your hooks. So it'll add stuff in orange. And then Vinia UI, Upward SEO, Page Builder, and so forth. And finally to the project source, which will register it hooks. Then at the next phase, the same order is run again. And then that's called the attach phase, where the same event bus, or the same hook bus is what it ought to be called, goes from Peregrine through the whole thing to the project source again. This is all of the installed modules, but this time it exposes the event bus with everything that all of these plugins registered on the first pass. So now you have these handles that are available. And then you now have the ability to attach handlers in the manner of attaching events. This is a little bit more explicit and tightly bound because these things are more like interceptors. An example of this would be that Peregrine registers a use app extension point, and its intent for this is that it has a use app talon implemented in a module, but if a third party wants to do something to use app, maybe wrap it or mutate it, then Peregrine exposes this extension point, and then inside the Peregrine source, it subscribes to the Webpack asset pipeline and will invoke any of its own registered hooks on use app when it sees use app passing by. So essentially, each plugin is responsible for the implementation of making the hook useful to the next plugins. I know that was a little complicated. Basically, Peregrine is at the attach phase, subscribing to the Webpack hooks, and then it sees every module go by, and when it sees the one it wants, it will call its own hook. There's a subsequent diagram which will demonstrate this a little bit better. And so anyway, once all of those attachments have taken place, then a bundler is created, and then it runs these phases, which then do the third thing to the hooks that have been registered and actually calls them. In the source code for BuildPack, when it loads its environment, it will also have access to this hooks registry, and it will literally call the load env hook, which will then execute anything that attached to it. And then at the load phase, Webpack calls its own hooks, which are also exposed as part of the global hooks registry. And then Peregrine calls its ones, and Vinia UI calls its ones. And then finally, during the bundle phase, for any assets that you would want to change that are directly output into the bundle, then plugins could opt into and tap into these hooks. And then finally, what's emitted is a deployable build artifact, just like is built today, but all throughout the process, all of these plugins were given access to different interception points during the process, and they were able to compile together a good application. The hope is that this stays pretty robust, because each of the plugins that are implementing hooks and that are subscribing hooks are all basically interacting with the fundamental objects inside the build system. That is to say, Webpack compilers, Webpack compilations, and a few of the environments, hooks, etc., exposed by BuildPack. So the convenient thing to do if you're developing a third-party plugin will probably be to use utilities that touch these low-level things, and we'll produce a library of utilities to make it easier for third-party developers. But the basic principle here is that interceptors at build time do not have the performance penalty at runtime, and they do have the safety of being able to do a compositional pipeline instead of doing a dangerous merge. That's the basic idea of the proposed extension system. There are a couple other diagrams, but let me pause here to ask if there are any major objections. It looks like Stephen wants to make some more noises.
Yeah, I just needed to slow my nose real quick. No, this this is a lot. I don't have any objections right now, but one thing that it seems like this is for sort of modifying existing components in place. I don't know if maybe I missed it, but was there is there a way to handle like custom components being injected right now? Is that a different thing that I'm talking about, or is that covered under this extensible build?
I would say that I would say that it's a special case of the things that an interceptor can do. We don't have all of the use cases kind of highlighted in this high-level diagram, but a great example of that would be if you want to add functionality to Venia UI. Let's say that you wanted to add another step in checkout. Venia UI would expose a hook for its checkout component. And then you'd be able to manipulate or replace that checkout component with your own wrapped function. Maybe what it would do would be to render the first 3 steps of checkout and then insert yours. But so being able to mutate and change the source code as it runs through the compilation process would include just being able to add things to it.
Okay, I think I understand.
Yeah, I mean, how would you do it? What would you do to this source code as it comes through? I wouldn't be hand editing text. What I'd recommend instead is that we have, again, a sort of a utility library so that Page Builder can like import the simple utility, a little like Babel has its path utility. So the Page Builder could call a simple method like wrap the default export of the CMS root component so that you can do something before the React component runs and then after. So essentially like a higher order component effectively.
Right.
That's one thing you can do, and then because Paragon will also expose its hooks, there are other things to do. So that's this diagram. Any other concerns or?
Yeah, Zetlin, one question.
Hold on a second.
What just happened?
Yeah. Can you hear us?
He dropped his phone.
I feel like his
Behind the
AirPods,
desk.
just
I load this program. Bad program that sucks.
Hello?
Hello, James?
Are you there?
Hey, I'm here. I'm sorry. I hate Blue Jeans. I loathe this program. It's a bad program that sucks.
All right, we have a question from Ravon here.
Yeah, please go on, Ravon.
Zetlin, if you go back to the picture, the chart,
Yeah.
that's doing something else right now.
God knows I don't even know what to. Can you
It's
see
okay.
it now?
Yeah, I can see it now. So you have this
Great.
hooks registry. How often do you think new hooks are going to be added or like removed or changed the functionality? Like once the system is mature enough to be published to everyone, like how often does the core team have to change this, or how often do extension developers have to keep up with new hooks or changes to the current hooks? Or like how hard would it be?
Well, I think you can look to the way that Webpack hooks are maintained for an example of how this would go. It is public API. It's additional API surface to expose, but I think it's the right way to do it, even if it seems like, well, it's more than an XML dialect. Oh no. You know, the XML dialects for Magento extensions really just connect PHP interfaces together, which then suffer from the same issues. In this case, you can look at the way that Webpack compiler hooks and compilation hooks are described. They're not super well documented, actually, but they still are a pretty good system that people have built a whole plugin ecosystem around. Looks like there's just no way for my computer to work normally with this terrible, terrible, terrible conferencing system. Anyway, Reventh, so yeah, if you look at Webpack's compilation hooks, compiler hooks, you'll see that they do have APIs and they are revved pretty slowly. But the reason that we're doing hooks here is because we kind of have that precedent to follow, and it means that we can expose the Webpack stuff using kind of the same concepts and the same APIs of the things that we're going to add to it.
Okay.
Another great example is that you can look at the HTML Webpack plugin, which you yourself added to our project, because HTML Webpack plugin is a really mature Webpack plugin that integrates very well, and it uses Webpack hooks, and it also exposes its own hooks for downstream plugins to do stuff to HTML Webpack plugins behavior. And that's the basic pattern we want to follow.
Okay. So if, let's say, we're building the cart right now, and then there will be new hooks coming up in the cart. Like we might want to do something else. So that has to go into this hooks registry. Is that thing? Am I remotely correct?
I'm sorry. Can you ask that one more time?
Yeah. So we'll be writing new hooks, right? Like new Peregrine hooks as part of upcoming changes. So will they be going into the hooks registry, or is the hook registry something else?
So good question. The major concern that I had, maybe you were prompting me because you saw this in chat, but the major concern that I have, even though Webpack hooks are clearly the way to go, is that the word hook is overloaded. Yeah. Because React hooks are a completely different concept, and they're something that we've bought into completely with Peregrine. And we love them. They're not going to go anywhere. The only problem is React, for all of the things that it's good at, should not have called these things hooks. That is totally out of sync with every other kind of software. But what are you going to do? We got to figure out how to make that clear. I think just saying React hooks, Peregrine Talons, or Webpack hooks might be enough.
That's it.
All right, we have 1 minute left. I want to make sure anybody that's on the call has a chance to ask any questions or bring up any topics that we did not cover today.
Here's another diagram, and then wait for it. Here's a third diagram. Make sense to everyone?
Yep.
Okay, good, cool. All right.
All right, so no questions for James. I would say, obviously, there's more work to do here. There's more work that's going to happen here. If this is a topic that's of interest to you, please make sure to reach out to James. You can reach out to the larger group here through the community Slack, or stay tuned on the PRs that you'll start to see move across the board. So we're at time, so thanks to everyone for joining. We'll have the recording up shortly after the meeting, and look for more updates as we continue to move forward with new venue features, extensibility concept work, and we'll have more updates next week. So recording is about to stop. Don't forget to smash like and subscribe. Honk if you like it. What else do we have? That's it? That's it. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.